Welcome to Business Revitalized, marketing solutions with the bearded marketer, and that is me. Today we are meeting with Evan Boudreaux, the Director of Economic Development at St. Mary Parish Government. Welcome, Evan.
Thanks, Greg. It's good to be here.
Fantastic. So today's podcast, we're going to be going over community building with the parish, with economic development, and how that ties into marketing and branding. And to start, welcome to the podcast. You have not been on yet.
It's true. No, this is the first time. I'm glad you decided to have me.
Yep, I'm pumped, and I hope we can have you on here again.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully you'll invite me back.
I hope so. If today goes well, if he actually knows what he's talking about.
Exactly. This will be the tell-all.
So I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. No. So, Greg, like you did, like you said earlier, like I'm in charge of economic development for St. Mary Parish, and I've been in this role for about 3 years or so now. Right before coming to this, I pretty much spent a lot of my time in the government sector, government affairs, mainly at the federal level. Worked for former Congressman Charles Bustani in his Washington office, and then whenever he left, I spent some time doing governmental affairs work for different businesses, but also the 8 regional economic development organizations throughout the state.
Right, and there are 8 in the state.
There are 8, yes.
Okay.
And that's kind of how I got my first, foray, I guess, into economic development. Did that for about 3 or 4 years, and then I went back to Washington and worked for Senator Cassidy, finishing as his deputy chief of staff. And I will say, I guess having that work in economic development on the governmental affairs side, and then going back into Washington and working in an official office, what that really showed me was pretty much everything that you can think of that has to do with community, that has to do with really just quality of life, anything. Kind of everything kind of all leads back to economic development in some way. And that's really where I started realizing, my passion for economic development. There isn't a degree, so to speak, that you can go to school for in economic development. I mean, and realistically, I don't think I knew what economic development was growing up.
Don't.
Exactly. And I wouldn't fault them, because it's not something that when people hear it, you hear economic development, a lot of times people are thinking, it has something to do with the economy. And in reality,
or building a building.
Yeah, or building a building. And in reality, yes and no at the same time. So whenever Senator Cassidy got reelected in 2020, I kind of knew at that point that I was ready to kind of do something else. I was very fortunate that the elected officials that I worked for were people that I just personally admired, but and that also represented not just Louisiana, but represented places that I call home. St. Mary Parish, South Louisiana, and knowing that I wanted to transition to something that I felt made a difference in just people's lives and just kind of really help make just where people are living better. That really kind of showed me, what to look for, I guess. So around that time, my predecessor, Frank Fink, was retiring, and I was reached out by one of the regional organizations, and the CEO of the regional organization basically said, "Hey, I think you'd be a great fit for this job, not only just from your background, but also you're from St. Mary Parish. And I think just you having that background in the parish, knowing the parish, I think it would be a good transition for you to get into that role. And you being as young as you are, he believed that I could make an impact doing that. And at first I was kind of hesitant, not so much do I really want to move back to St. Mary, but it was more so, I had been away from the parish for as long as I had been.
Right.
And while things weren't so different from when I grew up here, at the same time, it's just I've been kind of away for so long. I wasn't really sure that my experience would be, how relevant would that be to St. Mary? Well,
you still considered a local.
Yeah, exactly. Would I still be considered a local? That's a good point, because my parents and my younger siblings still live here, but I was away for so long, and how much could I actually bring to St. Mary? Well, I decided to kind of take the chance. I met with Parish President Hannegriff, and I met with him twice, and pretty much both times talking to them, they were very transparent. They asked me, based on my experience of what I thought, and then really, I think the thing that kind of really, I guess, assured me to like come back was my second time meeting with Parish President Hannah. He honestly asked me if I were in this role, like what would I hope to do for St. Mary Parish?
I was going to ask that.
And it was probably one of the first times that I think anybody's ever asked me that. Not even just necessarily about St. Mary, but just what do I hope to do in this role?
Right.
And then I started thinking about that answer before meeting with the parish president. And honestly, like the way I looked at it was looking back on my professional experience. The whole reason that I wanted to pursue like the field of work that I did was, I'm a big believer in public service. I'm a big believer in, everybody has a responsibility to make the place that they're at better than they found it and leave something better for those that are coming after us.
Good community.
Exactly. And it was almost like subconsciously that the different things that I did, whether it be professionally or just recreationally or even just from a community service standpoint, they all centered around the kind of like the same notion of like trying to strengthen where you're living, our just quality of life, our sense of place. And in the professional sense, I realized that a lot of the experiences I was receiving, I almost like subconsciously was telling myself, if this would be in St. Mary, this would be this would be great. Or if St. Mary looked at doing something similar to this, how much better would the place be?
And we've talked about many things.
We have, yeah. And I mean, you could absolutely relate to this because I think we've had conversations about this several times, but also just looking at the changes that have happened in St. Mary. I mean, I feel like a lot of the times those changes have happened, but the conversations for those changes have happened years before, you know?
Right.
And whenever
no actions were made.
Exactly, no actions were made. And that was the
maybe brief actions, but nothing that fulfilled anything.
Right. Nothing that fulfilled anything, nothing that was like, let's set the ground for like long-term change.
Because there's plans.
Yeah, there's always plans, but like,
I mean, you have to
have that will, exactly, that willpower and that determination to execute. Well, when Parish President Hannah asked me, what would I hope to do, essentially the way I approached it was, as someone who grew up in St. Mary Parish, I believe that where I accomplished what I accomplished was because of the values and just what was instilled in me growing up in St. Mary. And I think that St. Mary, the best days for St. Mary, I think a lot of times people talk about how great St. Mary used to be. And at the same time, like, I look at it as, I don't think we've really hit our potential yet. I think that the best days for St. Mary are still ahead of us. I honestly think that what's really needed is change. Like what's needed is fresh, innovative ideas that need to come in, and not just to talk about them, but to really take that next step and say, look, we have to try something new, because no matter what, the risk of failure is nowhere near the outcome of not doing anything at all.
That is correct.
I mean, if we don't do anything,
nothing can go wrong if you don't do anything.
Exactly. And honestly, that might be the safer way.
Nothing can go right either.
Exactly. That's honestly probably the better way to say it. Nothing can go right if we don't try anything new. And the way I look at it is, we can't keep doing the status quo. Yes, people don't like change, but the status quo, it's no longer working for St. Mary. And I think
not wanting change is why we are where we are.
Exactly. I also think that at the same time, whenever I was, I guess, appointed to this role, what really, and this is honestly probably another thing that kind of inspired me or motivated me to pursue this, it was the first time, at least in my lifetime in St. Mary, that I felt that I started seeing a true like groundswell, like community started support of younger people and people living in the community now saying, look, we're not satisfied with the way St. Mary is right now. We're not satisfied with the direction we believe we're heading. And that groundswell of like demanding change from the community level and the resident level, to me, like that was like an opportunity to really come in at that time and try to start implementing that change. So whenever the parish president offered me the position, by that point I was sold to come here. And I will say that, working in DC, working in the legislature, working in government affairs, I've never had a position that's been, as challenging as this one is, but nor as rewarding as this one is. I truly understand the magnitude of my decisions and like the outcomes of like what decisions I make on a day-to-day basis, how that can impact the lives of everyday people here.
Right.
And honestly, that's probably exactly what I was always hoped for growing up.
Yeah.
And this was basically the best kind of combination of all my interests and passions into an actual position.
Yeah, it's really a great opportunity because, like you said, the younger generation and some of the other generations as well know that we need change.
Yeah.
But you were given a position where you're able to help enact change.
Absolutely.
To where, as a business owner like myself, I'm not a huge corporation, so I don't have the money to throw at new developments and things like that.
Or time, really. I mean,
or time.
Yeah.
So the little guys want change, but it can be hard for us to make change being the little guys.
Absolutely.
And that kind of leads me to the next question that I want to ask you is, since you've been here, what kind of has the landscape of economic development in the parish changed since you've been here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Not to cut you off, but I definitely, and I think you're seeing it too, especially because let's think about this. Before you really went on and dedicated yourself to to a full-time marketing agency, I mean, we didn't really have that type of profession in St. Mary, at that magnitude.
Yeah, people do it.
People do it,
but you don't really hear about it.
Exactly. And a lot of times, if people are doing it, it might be a side gig. It might be very a niche where it's like a particular industry.
Right.
But like a full service marketing firm that is not industry specific, or it's not internal of a larger company, you don't see that very frequently. And for the most part, because you tend to see those in the larger cities, larger markets, and they're predominantly by younger people. And I think St. Mary is not considered a large market, but again, we're also not considered a very young community. So I think that just your business is an example of how we're already seeing that diversification. But at the same time, too, what we're seeing now is the oil, for example, the oil field has been basically tied to the history of St. Mary Parish. I mean, that's what we are known for. And I would say, probably for the most part of my lifetime in St. Mary, and probably yours too, the oil field, the performance of the oil field has been directly tied to the performance of St. Mary's local economy. When times were great, St. Mary was doing great. When times got bad, St. Mary was not doing well at all.
Correct.
So since I've been here, I will say diversification has been at the forefront. We're seeing newer industries starting to emerge, and not even necessarily industries as in newer companies. We're seeing our existing industries starting to diversify what type of work they're doing, which I'm particularly proud of St. Mary for doing. We started doing that before it kind of became essential, which really, when COVID hit, industry diversification was basically you had to diversify or you weren't going to survive. Yeah. Our businesses started doing that years before COVID kind of came onto the scene. And now we're starting to see the dividends of those investments and that diversification from years ago. We're starting to see the returns on that. During COVID, I mean, our shipyards and a lot of our metal fab shops had some of the most profitable years during COVID than they had the 7 years before. Honestly, I attest that to diversification. As the renewable energy conversation is taking off, and we're seeing that type of industry and that sector grow. Well, in St. Mary, the workforce and the type of work that our foundational companies are doing, I mean, it's not a far reach to kind of pivot to that industry as well. So
the skills are there. You just have to change the application.
Exactly, and that's the big thing is we're seeing that diversification already underway.
Correct.
At the same time,
with the wind farms and everything.
Exactly,
like that.
Wind farms, solar farms. I think now we're in the right spot that as kind of as the demand of increased demand of a specialized workforce is accelerating. I think that kind of what we need to start looking at now is how can we look at the workforce side of things. Because if we're not really investing or preparing that workforce, well, then the industry side will start to slow down. That industry improvement will start to slow down. We have to ensure that we are constantly having a pipeline of talent that's not only ready to go into the workforce and address the needs of our current businesses, but how can we basically demonstrate to businesses that are considering St. Mary for an expansion, how can we demonstrate that, look, we have a pipeline of talent that you can tap into day one, and you will be successful here, whether you're looking to expand, start new, or grow.
Yep, that actually ties into something else I'd like to talk about. So we had the the forum last night
Yeah.
for the state senate and representatives for District 21 and District 50, correct?
Yep.
So one
Hopefully,
of
I didn't disappoint anybody too much by the
the
moderator.
I thought you did great moderating, so you look like you enjoyed it.
Well, I did. I don't usually get to do stuff like that, and it was kind of like my Fox News moment a little bit.
Right.
Well, I guess we'll see how good of a job I did if I get invited back. But
Yeah, so this is kind of a multi-part. One of the candidates gave you a compliment on your efforts on bringing new business in.
Mhm.
But one thing that wasn't mentioned is, like you mentioned a little while ago, was you don't only try to get new business in. You try to get the current businesses that are in the parish to prosper more. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So another thing that was discussed in the forum was training our local workers to do new types of businesses, new type applications, and having the new welding school in Baldwin, that also trucking and all that. So we do have specialized things going on in our parish. But one of the things that they talked about was getting the word out.
Yeah.
Well, on the marketing and branding side,
Yeah.
how does Economic Development Department, yourself, how do we market to the employee to get trained in a new skill that can better their lives and their family lives and the community itself?
That's a good question, and I think that does go into one, like when we talk about branding. I think that does factor into the point of, what is the brand of St. Mary Parish? Who do we want to be viewed as? And like part of that aspect that I want St. Mary to be viewed as is we are a parish that not only invests in workforce, but we are a parish that invests in the continued improvement of our workforce, as well as we are a parish that has seen the strategic value of creating workforce pipelines between our residents, between the training providers, and in between meaningful employment. So, now keeping that in mind, like that's the image that I want St. Mary, and that I believe a lot of people want St. Mary to be viewed as when businesses think of it and when people think of it. How do we achieve that? And I think that goes to the root of your question. The first thing is looking at partnerships, and hitting on the partnerships aspect is basically multi-tiered. You have the actual training providers, so SLCCs. Then you have the employers, the people who need the workers or who are looking to fill those positions. You have the people who, whether they're within the company themselves or within the community, the people whose I guess role is to further the awareness of those programs, such as myself, such as the Workforce Commission office that we have in St. Mary, such as HR directors in different companies. So it's like basically looking at those kind of three groups. Essentially, it's coordinating between those three groups. How can we piggyback off of the strengths of each other? So going back to looking at SLCC, since they are the training providers, they're the experts that I consider the experts in the actual workforce programs that are being offered.
Which more of the trade skills.
Yes. So looking at how they are offering it and looking at what are the strategies that they're utilizing to further build that awareness locally and within the region. One, the network that my organization has, the network that the Workforce Commission has, the network that the HR directors have within their industries or within their communities, then it goes to the point of those individuals not only furthering and enhancing that marketing strategy, but I think it goes to a larger one is like sharing it from our own perspectives, such as economic development. A big key of economic development is workforce development. My office itself doesn't actually offer workforce training. However, what my office can help with is connecting employers with the financial resources to take advantage of those workforce training programs. Same thing with SLCC. Since SLCC is the experts at providing that training, well, what I think they do is, hey, when they're working with businesses and they're working with the businesses in the community, look, there are financial incentives and financial resources to make it really more attractive for businesses to pursue these workforce programs for their existing employees and to recruit new employees.
Correct, yeah.
Workforce Commission, a big part of the Workforce Commission. It's not just to grow employment within a region from the people in the region. It's to attract people to just jobs, wherever they're located. Job fairs. The Workforce Commission hosts job fairs throughout the state. The Workforce Commission has their own set of tools, so to speak, that can connect people with jobs. Tapping into that and really building that place, St. Mary's place in those systems. The way I look at it is, for the most part, I feel like St. Mary can be kind of viewed as an afterthought, where it's, we're not a major market, we're not a major located in a major region.
The parishes around us are.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, well, everywhere around us has all this to offer. Well,
except maybe Assumption.
Yeah, I mean thank God for Assumption.
That's the country.
Right.
Yeah. You want to live in the country, go to Assumption.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like, I think tapping into them to be like, okay, we want St. Mary to be a fixture with the Workforce Commission when it comes to jobs that are open for people, because there are people across the state who are looking for jobs.
Correct.
And
honestly,
are willing to move. So that's
they
the
want
first
to take
thing.
care of their not their parents. They want to take care of their family.
Their families, yeah. And that's the thing too, is like leveraging the strengths of each one of those groups and leveraging the resources of each one of those groups, combining those resources together. Because by doing that, leveraging the strengths of each organization and combining resources, well, one, that takes a burden off of one individual group, but it also maximizes the potential and maximizes the reach that each group could have individually as a collective, though.
Physically and digitally.
Exactly. Well, and I think that digitally isn't. I mean, there's probably at no other point in history has the digital medium been such a useful, essential tool. Like, if you don't have a digital presence today, you're just not relevant. Like, you can't compete. And I will say this: whenever I first came on as Director of Economic Development, my office, we virtually had no digital presence. We were very old school and very traditional. While we did achieve success that way, you're going to hit a ceiling with that. And I mean, part of it's I'm from a younger generation where I grew up with social media, whereas my predecessor, he didn't. That was a completely new medium of communication and outreach.
And his generation had many changes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I will say that those changes that his generation saw, he definitely took advantage of that. But towards the end of his career, that's whenever the advent of social media and digital marketing really kind of came to the forefront. And I mean,
and that's when you need the new generation.
That's when you need the generation to come in.
More expert at those
exactly. So one of the first things that I did when I came on was to establish ourselves with a digital presence. Not only because I wanted to build our presence up and just like be more visible, but also to increase that communication, to increase the visibility to businesses and other stakeholders that exist beyond St. Mary Parish's boundaries. Right. Because in reality, in today's post-COVID world, it used to be, how can communities compete for businesses to come here or businesses to stay here? But now it's expanded to, how can we recruit the most people to come and stay here? In St. Mary's case, until we can have that workforce situation addressed, and people within St. Mary are gonna want to work here and live here,
and
not move. But people from outside St. Mary want to come to St. Mary to work and live. Until that, we can really get to that point. No matter what business we recruit to St. Mary, we're only going to pretty much experience a fraction of the economic impact of that business. And any economic impact model that I could run, any model basically takes on the assumption that the workers that will be employed there are living in that community. So then it's showing you, the number that it's showing you, at least in St. Mary's case, it's inflated, because not nearly a majority of those employees will be living within St. Mary.
Big example, performance contractors.
Absolutely.
800 employees.
Yeah.
I guarantee you they don't all live here.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought them up, because that's a prime example of there are
is that St. Mary technically? Or
technically, I believe it falls into Assumption. Okay. But it's because it's right on that border.
But it affects us.
It absolutely. There's no way it couldn't, especially from that workforce perspective. Because at the end of the day, while yes, it is. I will never say it's a bad thing to receive the economic benefit from a company physically located in St. Mary and their employees.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if I had to choose between the two, I would almost rather employees travel outside of the parish to work, but bring their incomes home,
Right, spend it
spend
here.
their incomes here,
Correct,
because that's more outside money
Correct.
flowing through the local economy. You know, performance contractors, but the performance contractors example, that kind of highlights the benefit of collaboration with like our competitors, so to
Correct.
speak. So like Assumption Parish, like normally St. Mary and Assumption, I mean, we're going to compete for projects. Like that's just
Especially
natural.
since only a river divides us.
Exactly. But because of the same thing that you just mentioned, the fact that only a river divides us, well, there is the clear benefit to work with them on projects.
Correct.
Because if Assumption can recruit a project, well, that's great.
They
It's
could recruit
great
some
for
of our
us too,
employees.
because we can exactly, they can recruit employees, and there are people because
Plus
we're so close.
our steel suppliers.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. So the
manufacturing
dividends
side.
pay like way down the line. You see
Right.
that multiplier and spillover effect that benefits St. Mary directly.
Subcontractors that are working with them that are local.
Exactly. So I mean, there is a clear advantage to being what I would consider a border community, but at the same time, you know, we don't want to rely on just projects going to places surrounding us,
Right,
and just
of course.
hoping our
Exactly,
employees
yeah.
all go work there. Because
Yeah.
if that's all we do, then we'll never have any industry
Right.
in St.
I mean,
Mary.
technically speaking, if we would have had a dock manufacturing plant on this side of the river, we would have gotten performance contractors and not Assumption.
Absolutely.
And you know, that to me, that's more of a on the branding side. You know, I won't say any names, but there is a certain landowner in our parish. I can't remember if you and I have talked about this before, but I've talked about it with multiple people, and my family, our business, dealt with them for a little while. They turned down business because it's not the way they want to do business. But that is detrimental to the parish and our growth whenever large corporations are turned down because there's no bill to suit.
Absolutely. We'll see that, and that's the thing too. Landowners, private landowners, they are an essential partner in economic development, especially in St. Mary's case. We have a very large number of private landowners that private landownership has transcended generations. Like
Right. Some of my distant relatives
Right.
are reasons why we don't have Nicholls State University in Morgan City.
Man, imagine that.
Can you imagine our little island
Having that honestly,
and the home of all?
honestly, I think
was
if that's the
supposed to be in
case,
Morgan
if we
City.
had both those things, I think St. Mary would be a completely different place. To
It
be
would.
honest.
Plus the research facility that never
Oh, yeah.
happened.
We know, and that that's a good point. It goes to show you that like the landowners are critical partners in this. I will say now I'm starting to see a lot of that generational wealth in terms of land ownership. There are now more of them are starting to want to play ball, and a lot. I
Yes.
think a big reason for
Correct.
that is because the descendants who now are like in charge of it.
Yep.
A lot of them either they don't really live here
they see the
anymore,
need for
and they
change
see
as
the
well.
need for it.
Correct.
And a lot of the time too, if they're not living here, it's a
What's the
hassle.
point of
Exactly,
not
it's
selling?
a hassle to manage all that.
Why
So-
pay taxes on something
Exactly.
that you're not using?
And see, don't get me wrong, we're taking full advantage of that. And part of it is, developing those relationships with the landowners because they are a critical role to this. I mean, if we don't have sites, business development ready sites
People
to
can't
promote,
come
yeah, and then not only
people
people
can't
can't come in,
relocate.
people won't do it.
Yeah.
Because and I was at a conference in Williamsburg a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago now, and one of the big things that I heard from the site selectors on any panel that I listened to, they said the same thing. Nationally, what the biggest lack nationally is business ready sites, meaning that they want to see sites that have utility infrastructure already in place, that have multimodal transportation infrastructure already in place, and they want to see that the communities have invested their own resources into that.
Okay, yep.
And see, to a point, yes, the private landowners are a partner, and that's for the site, but parish government and local governments, like, we have to make those investments. And I think until we start making those conscious strategic investments into our sites, it's going to be hard to be as competitive as we could be. The waterways in St. Mary, that's probably one of our greatest assets, that and the rail access that we have. St. Mary is the only parish in southeast Louisiana that has direct on-site rail access, which makes us incredibly competitive.
Right.
But only up to a certain point.
Right.
Until
Especially since we have no direct rail access.
Right.
There's no site where you can stop a train.
And see, the other thing is,
It used to be back in the day in Morgan
Right.
City, but
exactly. Well, see, like now, and I will say, even to that point, up to a certain point, we are competitive in our multimodal transportation networks. But now we're seeing these I call them, quote, mega projects, which
Okay.
either one require large amounts of land. That I believe we're going to start to see that trend start to decline, but we're going to start to see, especially when it comes to like the renewable energy, we're going to start to see companies require large amounts of utility infrastructure in place. So part of that is local governments with our utility partners having to invest financial resources to enhance that,
Right.
without, not for a specific prospect, but ahead of time so that prospect can look at us. Until we get to that point, like,
Yeah.
we're not going to be taken as seriously for bigger projects. Granted, I will say there are certain locations throughout the parish that are incredibly competitive. The Port of West St. Mary, for example,
Right.
probably the most competitive location in terms of sites that we have to offer. I believe that, or actually I know, parish-wide, we have a lot more to offer, but we have to make those investments now for the future.
Right. You can't market something that can't be utilized.
Right, exactly. And honestly, the sites that we have now that are industrial sites, they were probably considered prime property, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But today, we haven't made those investments over that 20, 30, 40-year time to where they can still be prime real estate.
Stuff expires.
Now it's,
New
I don't want to
technologies.
use the word subpar, but for lack of a better word, they're subpar locations
Not
now.
current standards.
Right. We have to change that, and we have to do it now. Is it a costly investment? Absolutely, but that investment pays dividends for generations.
Right.
I mean, think of what St. Mary looked like at the height of the oil field industry in the pre-80s bust, and then probably 90s, coming the early 2000s. We can be that again, but we have to make those investments.
Right. I remember before the 2015 downturn, 2013, I remember, was one of our best years in my family's business. And 2014 was even better. 2015 was supposed to be better.
Yeah.
But obviously, shit happens.
Yeah.
And
Oh, does it?
and moratoriums happen, and unfortunately, people passed away in that whole regard as well. But it changed the industry, and it makes me happy I'm not in the oil field anymore. But it still affects where I live.
It does.
And I remember there was a tropical smoothie or whatever it was, the restaurant. They proved to the franchise that there was over 55,000 people that ate lunch or were around to eat lunch in Morgan City during the day.
Yeah.
And that's gone down to probably less than 35 or 30,000 people because of the downturn.
Absolutely.
And
Honestly,
they didn't stick around either because it's, for some reason, I know it's small towns across the country.
Yeah.
For some reason, small towns, it's the change.
Yeah.
Without the community support, places will not survive if people aren't open-minded.
Yes, that honestly,
McDonald's everywhere survives everywhere is because McDonald's is McDonald's. But why can't we have a healthier restaurant survive?
and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's probably my greatest personal frustration. And
Community support.
Yeah, because the thing is, it's community support for like something that's new, something that's different.
Right.
And for example, it feeds back to like the brand of St. Mary. That's something that in businesses, bigger business, they look at that. They absolutely look at what do the community at large think of the place they're living. I've heard stories of CEOs of companies flying into a place that they're considering expanding to, not telling anybody, the local EDO, not the local government, local leaders. They'll go check in, basically be a private citizen almost, get a bike or a car, and they just go down main streets, or they'll go drive through other businesses. They'll walk in and they ask either the worker, or they'll ask someone there to say, hey, what is it like doing business in St. Mary? Or what is it like doing business in Morgan City, Patterson, Berwick, wherever? And the response that they would get, that honestly
affects
dictates a huge part of their decision making. Because if the local community, if they're not supporting the existing businesses
their business
there,
won't be supported.
then why spend the money and the time to bring a new opportunity here if the people living there aren't going to support it?
Right.
Because if they're not going to support the existing industry, there is no expectation they would support something new. And again, it goes back to when we see something new that's starting here organically. I mean, I think a good example is with what Jonathan Scully's doing at Lakin Park.
Yep, Lakin
When that
Reynolds is
when that
amazing.
first started, you could see just a lot of the negativity on social media.
That'll never work.
And that's the thing. It's like, one, I don't really get the logic behind that, because
It's not your money.
it's not your money. And if it's not something that you're interested in, then don't go to it. That's
Then you're not the ideal client for them anyway.
Exactly. But don't knock the idea, because at least they're doing something. And to me, it's like, I'm a big believer that if someone is just complaining without offering a solution or an alternative solution, that's just perpetuating the problem.
Right.
And we already are facing a lot of problems. We don't need to add to the list.
Yeah.
So I look at this as saying, look, whether you personally believe something's a good idea, don't knock it. If anything, support it. Go try it out. See that new thing, because, one, you might be wrong. And even if you're right, at least something was tried. Because we learn from failure. And if we're not taking the risk to fail, we're not learning anything at all.
Exactly, yeah.
And we're just basically prolonging the inevitable.
Right. Yeah, we're only delaying our eventual demise.
Yes.
Just like mining towns. They don't exist anymore because the mine went away.
Thank you. Or I mean, honestly, think of it. And I'm glad. I'm really you're tapping into my mind right now, because it's like, think of the Rust Belt, or like the auto industry like hub back post World War II.
Right.
South Bend, Indiana, Detroit, Michigan. That whole area. That was basically
the Mecca.
The Mecca of the auto industry, not only just in the United States but in the world.
Right. Yeah.
Look at those places today.
Yeah, now it's just museums.
Exactly. They're museums of what used to be.
Yeah.
And I will say those communities, are they bouncing back? Yes.
And their employees make bank.
Exactly. But it's like, look at what new things came from that. But if you looking at those things, like when the downfall of that stuff started to happen, if people just said, oh, well, all these other new ideas aren't going to work, and they just never took the risk to do it, well, then the success those communities are facing now, they wouldn't have that.
And the thing that bothers me the most is, with the community support part, the same person who will knock a new business coming into town, it may or may not work.
Yeah.
Let that business owner make their own choice, their own mistakes, their own triumphs.
Yeah.
But that same person that bitches about it will easily go support somebody on Amazon they've never met.
Right. Or drive 20 minutes
or
to
drive 20
Homa,
minutes to Homa,
drive to
Lafayette.
yeah. And spend their money there at something that we could easily have here.
One of the things on that point, there are most people you talk to in St. Mary Parish, be it Franklin, be it in Patterson, be it in Morgan City, Berwick. Where's good places to eat? Oh, we only got like 3 restaurants.
Right.
No, we don't.
Right.
We got a lot of restaurants.
Right.
But I have seen some fail because lack of community support or a poor location. And that's branding and marketing at its finest. If you don't get the word out, nobody's going to know and nobody's going to support you.
Right. Like whenever a good thing that I like to say is, in economic development, there's always metrics to quantify and qualify, so to speak, success. But however, the best measure of success, it's not based on a number. There's no number that you. I mean, yes. Are there numbers that you could say that this means you're emphatically successful?
Right.
Yes, but true success in economic development, to me, is not based on a number. It's based on, think of the places you go and visit. When you go and visit, are you thinking, man, I wonder what kind of economic incentives this place offers?
No, of course not.
You're going to this place and you're like, man, this is a really cool place to be.
This is a really cool
I
place.
really like coming here.
I can buy a boogie board here.
Exactly. Like when you go to those places and you're thinking, like, man, there's a lot of people who just like to come here. Who like to come and just relax, shop, hang out, do whatever.
This business is made up of a bunch of containers. This is really cool. I want to come back here.
Exactly. That to me
doesn't matter that their food sucked.
Right. And you think about that while you're in those places, you start to think, man, the way you're thinking about those places, that's success.
Why can't we think that way here?
And see, to me, there's no reason we can't.
There's no reason we can't be a destination.
Exactly. I mean, hell, the way I think of it is
Sportsman's paradise.
I think St. Mary, and I'm glad, it's funny, as I was just about to say the same thing. Louisiana has the national moniker of being sportsman's paradise. If you ask me, there is no place in Louisiana that best embodies sportsman's paradise than St. Mary Parish. We should be using that to our advantage.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like that's something that we're not doing enough. I mean, whether it be
if I was an
recreation.
avid fisherman, and I knew all the right fishing places, I would have a fishing tour trip.
Oh, absolutely.
That people from New Orleans would come when they're visiting New Orleans.
Absolutely.
They travel an hour and a half from New Orleans to go on fishing trips. Why can't they travel to St. Mary Parish?
Exactly. I mean, or think of like Sycamore Point. We have a state park in St. Mary Parish.
Yes.
That
they've actually been marketing themselves really well. I follow them on Facebook.
I'm glad about that because they've made some serious investments there to really enhance it. And I will say, Councilman Rodney Olander, he's a native of Sycamore Point.
Okay.
I don't think I've met someone who is such a strong advocate for Sycamore Point than he is. And honestly, he will fight tooth and nail to ensure that Sycamore is getting the attention it deserves. But at the same time, if you look at the camps down there, 90% of those camps are people who are high wealth individuals who don't live in St. Mary.
No, it's a vacation spot.
They will come and travel to St. Mary and Sycamore Point because they know what it has to offer.
Right. I mean, look at Lincoln Park.
Yeah.
It is probably. I'm not a huge. I don't have huge experience in RV parks.
Yeah.
But there's not much to do there.
Right.
There's no water features besides the lake.
Yeah.
There's no like splash pads or anything like that for the kids. But it is popular.
It is. And honestly, I will say about Lincoln Park, I had a conversation with Mayor Dragna not too long ago, and I will say, when Mayor Dragna came into office, talking to him, that is one thing that I think he really saw, probably like earlier than a lot of people did. And just talking to him about plans that he wants for Lincoln Park and that we've worked together on is how to enhance that asset the community has.
That is our biggest asset.
It is. And I think that just talking about him about some of the plans of how to further develop that asset, that's the right thought process we should have everywhere. And honestly, Mayor Dragna, he's an elected official. That obviously there is that political benefit from that. But at the end of the day, he's also a resident. His kids live there. His grandkids live there. Same thing with myself.
His business is there.
Same thing with myself. I'm a native of St. Mary. I live in St. Mary. Yes. Is there an obvious gain from a professional standpoint to develop that? Absolutely. But there's also a personal gain.
A quality of life.
Exactly. Like I want to be able to spend. If I want to be able to go and do fun things in St. Mary, I want to be able to go and do fun things in St. Mary. I don't want to have to travel to Lafayette or Houma or Thibodeau or wherever.
I'll give you an example.
To go do fun things.
And I'll give you an example with me. I like to do things. I like to get up and go.
Yeah.
And if there was more developed sites for things that I like to do, I would stick around and do those things on the weekend or even at night, where, Lincoln Park has a little man-made beach. It's not the nicest because it is bayou water coming in.
Yeah.
It is what it is. But it's fun. It's cool. You're in the sun. You have cypress trees.
Where else in Louisiana can you get a beach other than Grand Isle?
Exactly. Yeah. But to your point, if I want to go to the beach, I got to drive to Grand Isle or Biloxi. Yeah. That's the closest places. They're still not that nice, but they're within driving distance, and I can do it in a day.
Absolutely.
But if there's other things here that I could do in the parish in a day, Sycamore Point, going to Franklin, Main Street, or Lincoln Park, or even if something gets put at the river in Morgan City, go check out the museums, because we do have local museums.
Yeah.
And are they marketed well? For what they are, I think they are. Could they be done better?
Absolutely.
Most certainly. And that's, and on that part of it, you and I have a similar story of moving back in 2020.
Yeah.
I was living in New Orleans and COVID happened and everything shut down. So I was like, well, I'm going to move back home, and when I was thinking about what can I do, and well, can I work for the oil field? I have operations experience, I have sales experience, I have marketing experience. It's like, well, can I start my own business? And what can I start that can survive here? And one of the local issues in our parish is it is difficult to start a business and have the local economy support it. So I was like, well, I could do marketing and I could travel, I could work from the road. I was like, I'm doing that. Digital marketing, way to go. And it took me about 2 years to go full time. But the thing that I have pride in is that this parish allowed me to go full time.
Yeah.